With the help of Hashem, we are learning Rosh Hashana Daf Chav Gimel. We left off on Daf Chav Beis, Amid Beis, 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid. We just began to learn concerning how things were done originally. That torches were lit and a relay of torches would spread. And that's the way people will know when it's Rosh Chodesh. So says the Gemara that during that era, they would only light the torches al ha-chodesh shenira bizmanoi lekachoi. They only lit the torches at the night going from Aleph to Beis. So when they saw a torch, they knew that the previous month was deficient, meaning that that day, the day before they saw the torches, earlier on, that day could have been the 30th, but it was made into the 1st. But if the prior month was left full, Rosh Chodesh was not on 30 remained day 30. Rosh Chodesh became day 31, then no torches were lit at all. It was only lit after a deficient month, and the question will be, why, Aleph, why not light it always? Why not say whenever Rosh Chodesh is, that night, the night after, they should light torches, whether it's a deficient month, whether it's a full month. And even though we will see, first of all, we'll explain why doing it that way could create confusion. So they can only light it in one of the months, either after a deficient or after the full. So then why not light it always after the full? Why dafka only after the deficient? We're going to have some agadata on Daf Chav Gimel. First of all, we're going to have a discussion about the meaning of the word erez. Narrowly, erez means a cedar tree. But as we will see that erez can refer to 4 different types of trees, actually erez can refer to 10 different types of trees. And when we speak about a tree, we will see that a coral, which is tree-like growing out of the seabed, is also considered in this context a tree. We're going to speak about how they would bring up, how one should bring up coral from the seabed. We're going to have some other beautiful agadata all the way leading into Chav Gimel Amid Beis on the top. We're going to have in the new Mishnah on Amid Beis, the Mishnah will describe how the Beis Din would receive the witnesses in Yerushalayim. Even though, again, the witnesses came to the Sanhedrin, but in the vast majority of our history, the Sanhedrin was, as it should be, as it will be in Yerushalayim and HaKodesh. And finally, on that Chav Gimel Amid Beis, we're going to have another Mishnah that's going to start telling us how the Beis Din would examine the witnesses. And as we already mentioned, that in the beginning of the month, the moon will always be to the east of the sun. The little sliver of the moon, which is so little that if the sun is up in the horizon, the light of the sun would overwhelm and we would not be able to see this little moon, the new moon. So normally the new moon is seen right on the after sunset, which fits because the moon is to the east of the sun. Now the moon is also just about to set. So the moon is going to be already coming down low, relatively low on the horizon, but there's going to be a certain window in where the new moon will be visible. And they're going to ask the witnesses whether they saw to the east of the sun or to the west of the sun. And obviously, if the moon is to the west of the sun, then they're lying. The new moon will never be to the west of the sun. They're also going to ask another obvious question for people who know whether the indentation of the moon, the Pigma of the moon, is it facing the sun or is the indentation of the moon facing away from the sun? No, as you can just imagine, if this is the little sliver of the moon and this would be the sun, the moon is never seen this way. The moon will always be seen the opposite way. From the perspective of the sun, from where we're looking at, so to say, the sun always sees the roundness, the fullness of the moon, and so many other details regarding the examination and much more. Let's start again on Daf Chav Beis, Amid Beis, second to last line, my tam, right? So we only would light the torches after a deficient month. Why not light it always Rosh Chodesh? So if the 30th became day number 1, light it tonight. If the 30th remained the 30th, that means the month remained a full month, became a full month, remained a full month, and the next day is Rosh Chodesh, fine. So on that night, they should also light the torches. Why not always light it? That's the first question. All right, Thursday is the 29th. Thursday night, Friday, will either be the 30th or it will become day number 1. Case was the witnesses saw the moon Thursday night. They came Friday to the Beis Din, and Friday became day number one. And again, as we are saying, when would they light the torches? You can't light the torches at day. No one would see it during the day. They would light it at night. Friday night, you can't light torches. So in the case where the deficient month is on Friday, they would not be able to light it on Friday night. They would have to light it Motzoi Shabbos, right? So now, Amos of the Ba'afukei Shabbos, so you can only light the torches when Shabbos goes out, Motzoi Shabbos. So now we'll explain why they would only light the torches after a deficient month, and then there would be no confusion. Because if you're going to also have the torches lit, whenever Rosh Chodesh is, the following night, so when people are going to see the torches lit Motzoi Shabbos, they're going to have a real doubt. They won't know how many days did the previous month have, which day was Rosh Chodesh. Asu limitei daf chav gimel on the top. They would be confused. They might make a mistake. And Amri, they would ask the following: maybe Hai Chasaru. Maybe Rosh Chodesh was made Friday. Friday was not the 30th. Friday became day number one. And why didn't they light the torches Friday night? No, because it's Shabbos. Halachically, we're not allowed to light fire on Shabbos. Or maybe they're going to say Malehu. No, they're lighting it Motzei Shabbos. If they would also always light the torches after Rosh Chodesh, even if it's a full month, so maybe the Edom declared Rosh Chodesh on Shabbos. Friday remained day 30. Shabbos is day number one. And therefore they lit it tonight because it's the night after Rosh Chodesh. And that problem is resolved when you only light the torches after a deficient month. Then you got no problem. In other words, when the month is a full month, they would never light torches. They would never light torches. They knew that Friday was either 30 or 1. If they see the torches, even Motzei Shabbos, again, they only light it for a deficient month. They know that Shabbos is not Rosh Chodesh. If Shabbos would have been Rosh Chodesh, then the prior month would have been a full month. After a full month, you don't light the torches. The Gemara is not happy with this answer. There's going to be one more pushback regarding this answer. 3 lines from the top. Hold on. Why don't they say that whenever there was Rosh Chodesh, the following night they light the torches, whether the month was a deficient, whether the month was a full month? However, in this case, in this one case, if Friday was made into Rosh Chodesh, rendering the prior month a deficient month, then in that scenario, don't light the torches at all. And when people will see that there are no torches, much as Shabbos, and the only time you would not light the torches is if Friday was Rosh Chodesh, then they'll know the answer. If they won't light the torches, and if the rule would have been that they always light the torches, so then they'll understand, they don't know for sure the chasaru. That would have been a proper way of communicating. So says the Gemara, even if that would have been the rule, there would have been confusion. What would have been the confusion? Because if you want to inform people about something through not lighting the torches, there's always the possibility that the torches were not lit because of an oinus. Oinus means, and that goes specifically for Motzoi Shabbos, it's not uncommon for people to make a fabrengen on Shabbos, and sometimes during a fabrengen, even though one should never drink beyond moderation, it happened and people drink too much l'chaim. Means it's possible that the Greisa Sanhedrin and everyone, Motzei Shabbos, they had too much to drink on Shabbos and they did not do something because they were recuperating, they were having a hangover. Amri, hi Molly, who maybe it's Molly. Why didn't they light the torches? Because because they have the oinus of shichrus, the oinus of not being moderate, the oinus of having too many lachaims, gewaldig. And therefore, again, not communicating through a non-action is not why. Sometimes people will think maybe they didn't do it for another reason. Okay, so now the Gemara accepts that to prevent confusion, can't do it after both types of months. I get that. Only after one of the two types of months do you light a torch, but there's still one kasha here. Why did they establish that you light the torches after a deficient month? Only they could have done light the torches only after a full month. Would have been the same thing. Only after a full month. So answers the Gemara. So here for this answers the Gemara. Like Rashi says, 11 lines from the top of the Amid. if they would only light torches, after a Chodesh Malay, let's focus, Rashi says, on Rosh Hashana. And again, even though the fact was that Miyamais Ezra ve'elach, Elul only had 29 days. Elul used to be a chaser. But again, there's always the possibility, and it's an acceptable possibility for a reason, that Elul would be made into a full month. So, let's say today is the 29th day of Elul. Today is for sure not Rosh Hashana. We're living far away from the Sanhedrin. Tonight, everyone would begin keeping at that time Rosh Hashana. This is according to Rashi, according to Tosfos, according to everyone, because tonight might be Rosh Hashana. Tomorrow day, again, either it's the 30th of Elul, not Rosh Hashana, or it became Rosh Hashana. No one is going to go to work. People are going to be noyeg the din of Rosh Hashana. Now listen to the advantage. If the torches are always lit the night after a deficient month, which means that if today Taka was made into Rosh Hashana, they would light the torches tomorrow night. That's perfect. No one did malacha on that day because they were presuming that that day was Rosh Hashana. When they'll see the torches, they'll get a confirmation that yes, today was Taka Rosh Hashana. Once they know that the day that just passed was Rosh Hashana, then Beis Tishrei is a weekday. They can go back to work. They know. It's gavaldik. If they would only light the torches the night of a full month, the Hers was Tutzachda. So when would they light the torches? They would light the torches tomorrow night. That means you would have to wait until the next night to know whether it was a mali, whether it was a chassid. So vaitin, because of the suffix, you again would not be able to do malacha, which is the way we are noheg today. We don't do malacha 2 days. We consider 2 days Rosh Hashana already a yoima arichta. But that's now. But there was a time where you could have prevented people from having to keep 2 days Rosh Hashana only if you light the torches after the deficient month. So says Rashi. Tosfos, the second Tosfos adds that Rashi didn't have to only speak about Rosh Hashana. Tosfos speaks about the fact that on Rosh Chodesh, on every Rosh Chodesh, and by the way, that's today, at least for women, to a certain degree, a minig, to a certain degree, the way things should be, that there's a certain amount, not of isur malacha, it's called bitul malacha. There's a diminution of work, especially that women should not do on Rosh Chodesh. Same thing. No, if you have a doubt when Rosh Chodesh is, it's better to resolve the doubt sooner rather than later. Because if you only resolve it later, then until the later, misafek, the women that don't do malacha on Rosh Chodesh would have 2 days of bitul malacha, and people don't want that. Or for the people that don't want it, you resolve it by lighting the torches after the first possibility, always, and never after the second possibility. Only after a deficient month, and not after a full month.
Rabbi.
Okay. Yes.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Quick question. About the Motzei Shabbos lighting. How did you know that that they saw it really Thursday night, as opposed to maybe they saw it Friday night, and really?
So Danny, I'll speak on that. Since they only lit the torches after a deficient month, there's only 2 options, Danny. If Thursday is day 29, that's the case here. Friday is either day 30, right, or day 1. If Friday was day 30, then Shabbos is day 1. Now that there's a cloud, you never light the torches if the previous month was a 30-day month. So if the Eidim would have seen the new moon only Friday night, which means that the Sanhedrin would have made the Rosh Chodesh only Shabbos day, there would be no torches. The fact that there is torches means that the prior month was a deficient month. They knew when the prior month began. So that establishes that Rosh Chodesh was Friday. They'll never think if Rosh Chodesh would have been Shabbos, there would have been no torches. That's the advantage of only lighting the torches after a deficient month. And not after, and not both. That was the answer. It works now.
Rabbi, when there were no torches, how did the people in Bavel know when Rosh Chodesh was?
So first of all, it used to be, it's after, so all it took was one time for the Kutim to mess everything up. They lit the torches when there was no declaration of Rosh Chodesh. That messed it up. People thought that the day was Rosh Chodesh and it wasn't. It was Punkt on Rosh Hashana, like we said, the Meiri says. That means that they wanted for people, God forbid, to violate Rosh Hashana. So they sent shluchim speak. And like we learned yesterday, you don't need to have 2 witnesses coming to every location. You had, many shluchim went out, but every shliach had a designated area where he needed to go. And prior to them getting the testimony of the shliach, they had a doubt. And all of that is how the second day Yom Tov in Golus began.
So in that time, even there was never 2 months deficiency, like one back.
So again, we learned yesterday that 2 months deficiency was something that could have happened. It was a rarity. When it happened, people found out about it, but it could have happened. That's why there was always a doubt. I want you to know that,
so
right?
the shluchim who were sent out to these communities, they also had to be, so the beis dins in those communities needed to also make sure that they were good Eidim, correct?
So what we said yesterday was that even though the witnesses that come to testify in the beis din that they saw the new moon have to be trustworthy, not so in the case of the shluchim. Why? Because of the rule of kol milsa davida ligiluya lo mishakri ba'inchi. That's what we learned yesterday. There was a much lower standard. It was much easier to accept the testimony, the Braisa said, from someone that came from the end of the world, which means from Mr. Nobody. No one knew who he is. Now, if you knew someone is a liar, if you knew someone was a kuti, someone was a tzeduki, then you wouldn't accept it. But there was a much higher usage of cheskas kashrus when it comes to receiving a shliach versus when it comes to testifying in court. That was daf chav beis. Let's go weiter. So we are up to daf chav gimel by the 2 dots. We're going to have from now until the end, until the next Mishnah, a lot of very meaningful agadata. Ketzad hoyo masiyah masuais. Again, the Mishnah, even though this minig was no longer, but the Mishnah writes so much about it that yesh loimer, that they're going to continue to do so after the coming of Mashiach, even though we'll have other means of technology of communication. There's an inyan about this. The Mishnah writes all the pratim that they would take the kiloi nosois, they would take the long poles, right, of cedar wood. So Amar Rav Yehuda, that even though the Mishnah uses the words of Erez, Kolonsois, okay, that even though they would take Erez specifically means cedar, Zostovisensein, that sometimes Erez is a more of a generic name for many different types of trees, and 4 types of trees fall in the category of Erez. And they are Erez, Taka, cedar wood, Kartoim, another tree, Eitz Shemen, Havas Katroim, Katroim, Eitz Shemen, and Uveroish. These are the 4 types. And now, what is the meaning of each one? So the Gemara translates. So Erez, the Gemara doesn't have to translate. Erez taka means cedar wood. Katroim Amarav, it means Adra or Idra. That's the name of a tree, an Adra tree. The Veda Shila says, no, that Katroim means Mavliga, a Mavliga tree. But Amar Law, other people say, no, it's the Gulmeis tree. Now that we established that there are 4 types of trees that fall into the category of Erez, so says the Gemara, this argues with that which Rabba Barafuna taught us. So Amar Rabba Barafuna, in the name of Beit Rav, he said in the name of the Shiva of Rav, that really Asara B'nei Arazim Ein. And before we go on, let me just share the following concept, perhaps, Ulei Shloima, that we have in Kabbalah the words Netiyos, and I know that trees are not Netiyos, but they are in the category of Netiyos. Netiyos specifically, we had this in Rosh Hashana, means saplings, little trees versus big trees. But one of the words that we use in Kabbalah for the Sfiras are Netiyas. Why? Because they're so connected to the ground that godliness is not an extension of God. It's not something separated. Malachim in Kabbalah is called Nivdalim. Nivdalim means they're very ruchnias. They're not Gashmi, but they're separated from godliness. They're like they're creations. They're in the Wabriya. They're Nivroim, not Ne'etzalim. And L'chayra, this is the Machlaikas here. 4, just whenever we speak about the 4 Sfiras, it's Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, and Malchus. That's the 4. And the 10 is the 10 Sfiras. So what are the 10? The 10, Asorimine Arozim Haim. Sheneman, as it says on Pasuk, that God says that in the future, I'm going to place even in the desert. And here we go. Erez, number 1, Shita, number 2, Hadas, number 3, Shemen, number 4. That Osim Bo Arava, again, I'll place in the Arava in the desert. Veroish is 5, Tidor is 6, and Usa'ashur is 7. They'll all be placed together. Now, this pasuk only has 7. Before we come to the problem, he said 10, you only have 7. Again, the Gemara is going to teach, and Aramish, the meaning of every tree. Eres is, like we said, Arza. Eres means cedar. Shita is Turnisa. Turnisa, we're going to teach pine trees. Right? Atse Shitim, Hastoda Shita. Hadas, Asa, myrtle. Hadasim. Eitz Shemen means Afarsim, a balsam. Veroish is a tree called Verasa, boxwood. Tidor is Shaga, fear. Sa'ashur is a tree called Shu Rivna. Okay, now that we interpreted the 7, hold on, that's only 7. Hane, Shivi, Hava, that's 7. The Beit Rav said it's 10. Here again, there's 7, there's the 10, there's the 7 midas, there's the 3 moichen. We separate them. So Kiyasa Rav Dimi Amar, that the pasuk Taka only mentions 7. But there are other 3. What are the other 3? Yosif Aleim, Aloinim, Almoinim, and Almoigim. What are they? So Aloinim is Butmei, elms. Almoinim is Belute, oaks. And here we go. Almoigim is Kisisa, coral. Coral is not what you would call a tree. Coral is for people who go diving. Coral is those beautiful tree-like protrusions that come up from the seabed, right? That the fish live in the coral, and you go scuba diving, and you see the beautiful coral and the fish that go into the coral. So that's the 10th tree. Again, very meaningful. That already when it comes to the moichen, the higher up you go, the closer you get to the Ein Sof, the closer you get to Kesed, right? That's the Alma Discassia. It's already a tree in the seabed, under the water. Now, Ikad Amri, that the final 3 is Aroinim, Armoinim, Almoigim. Here again, the Gemara is going to teach. Aroinim is Orei, laurels. Armoinim is Dulve, right? Chestnuts. And Almoigim, again, everyone holds that the 3rd or the highest of the trees is called Kasisa coral. Now that we spoke about coral, so the Gemara is going to tell us how exactly did we bring the coral up to the surface. And coral is very valuable. But according to the way we're suggesting, maybe coral represents Chachmanach. So it's when it says that even a mighty ship cannot cross. Where did we learn about this pasuk? Tanach looks very happy over there in Shkolim and in Yuma that when the Mashiach is going to come from the 3rd Beis Hamikdash, from the Kodesh Kodshim, is going to come out a little trickle of water. Right in the beginning, it's going to be as narrow as the grasshopper's antennas. That's in the beginning. But then it's going to become so large and mighty that even a large ship won't be able to cross it. So, what type of a ship are we referring to that even that ship cannot cross it? So Amarav, that refers to Burni Gedoyle. There's certain large ships, and large ships were needed dafka to extract the coral out of the seabed. Very large is also meaning that the walls of the ship were very tall. Now, Heichad Avdu, indeed, how did they use these large ships to bring the coral up from the seabed? So this is what happened. It demanded a lot of labor. Either Maisu Shit Alfi Gavre, either if they only got 6,000 workers, then they needed to work for 12 months, the Tresi Yarchishata. Or if they managed to get 12,000 workers, then they succeeded in only working 6 months in the year. Why did they need to have so many thousands of workers? Because what they needed to do is they needed to bring those ships right on top where the coral is. Now the coral is in the seabed. The coral is all the way in the bottom. I know we go in shallow water, but still the ship has to be over the water. You need to bring from the shore, from the beach, you have to bring sand. You have to go back and forth and start filling up the ship with sand. The more sand you put on the ship, the lower the ship goes. Again, the walls of these ships were very tall. See, Adid, it was mighty. So it was a type of ship that even though you brought it down many feet in the water didn't enter the ship. But what you did was you got the ship to come all the way to the bottom of the ocean, to the bottom of the seabed. You can say it by heart. Then they would take ropes that would have divers that would go down there. Again, we know coral is not that deep, but it's a little bit deep. You would dive down there. You would take very strong ropes made out of flax. They're stark. You would tie some of it one end to the coral, the other end to the ship. And now you would have to get rid of the sand. When you get rid of the sand, by nature, the ship comes up. When the ship is going to come up, that will give you the koyach to rip the coral out of the ground. How fantastic is that? So let's read it inside. So you would have a lot of people. Again, 12 and 6. And v'to'ani leichala, and they would load it up. They would load it up with sand. Ad the shachn, until the ship would settle on the seabed. Again, it's settling on the seabed without water entering the ships because it was mighty ships, meaning there was very tall ships. And once you got the ship on the seabed, the Nach is bar amoiroi. See, amoiroi means an interpreter, and amoiroi also means a diver, because that's what amoiroi, they dived into the Mishnah. And v'kotar, they would tie atunei dechitana, they would tie the end of a flax rope, bechasisa, they would tie it they would tie it on the coral. They would really tie it in the root, in the bottom of the coral, because they wanted to bring up as much of it as they could. And the katelhu, and they would tie to the other end of the rope would be tied bisafin to on the ship. So now that you had it all bound together, all you need to do now is v'nat li chala. They would remove the chala. They would chala, meaning the sand. Uveshadu lebaroy, they would throw it overboard. That they can throw into the water. And v'kama the medalya. As the ship begins to rise, so versteht sich, is akra, it would uproot the coral, umasyan, they would bring it. How valuable was the coral? You have all these people needed, umachlev al chad, terein b'chaspa, that for whatever amount of coral, you would sell it and you would get in exchange double of it in silver. So if let's say if kesed is ahavos chesed, if we're going to say this is Chachma, the highest of the 10, the last of the 10, going Milmato Lamaila, then it's Chachma, which is higher, which is a step above. Okay. Now the Gemara says that you should know that the class Parvos Ahavyam, that there were three ports. Two of such ports where, again, literally is where they would go ahead and extract the treasures from the seabed using these techniques. Two of them were in Ar Moi. They were in the territory of the Arameans, and one of them, Alamol, the Persians, they get in somehow. The Bey Parsoi, the Persians had such a port. Now the Bey Armoi, Masken, Kesisa, they would use this technique to bring up coral. The Bey Parsoi, the Persians, Masken Margana Yasa, there they brought up pearls. Now, why do you have to have ships to bring up pearls? I don't know. Maybe the earth over there under the Persian territory is holding on to the pearls. They don't let go. You gotta know how to get it out of them. And they had so much wealth. I apologize to all of the Persians, especially of Baruch Hashem. Kevan is giving me a break. Umakaria parvasa de mashihig, and they call this the kingdom sport. The kingdom sport because the kingdom, you become a kingdom through ashirus, through wealth. All of the wealth of the kingdom, the koyach, the economy of the kingdom. Beruchni is that everything begins with chachma. Okay. Perhaps. Amar Rabbi Yechanan, says Rabbi Yechanan. Now that we spoke about the 10 types of erez trees, one of them includes the pine tree. Kol shita v'shita, every single pine tree. Shenatru nachrim Yerushalayim, that the Goyim removed from Yerushalayim. And again, Beruchni is if we're saying that the trees in general refer to the netiyos, uprooting the nekatzan b'ketzias. What happened over there? The people that became apikursim, the ones that went into the paradis, is because they misunderstood godliness as something separated. Achdus Hashem is it's connected. People that fall into some concepts of duality on every level, that they're uprooting the trees. So the Goyishkeit and all of the foreign ideas that had certain levels of Achdus Hashem taken away from us, Hashem is going to return. Because there's going to be such a gilui of godliness that all of this will become clear, that the whole world is nothing other than an extension of Elikus. And all of the trees that were uprooted by the Goyim, God is going to return it. There's going to be a gilui of godliness. Shenemar, as it says, that in the future, Etin Bamidbar, I will replace in the Midbar, this refers to Yerushalayim, Erez and Shita, and by the way, the pasuk says Hadas, and the Eimin Yerushalayim during the Galus time, because it's nothing as it should be, because Siyam Bamidbar Hois. So now that we spoke about, even though the Gemara didn't quote the word Hadas, it only quoted Erez Shita, but we spoke about on Hadas, so Amar Rabbi Yechanan, I'll tell you the meaning of hadas. That kol halem Torah person, people who learn Torah, but they don't share that which they know with others. They are like a hadas, but it's in the desert. And he's saying the first version is that's something not so good because a hadas smells so good, but if no one is there to smell it, it's like wasted fragrance. For whom? You know Torah, go teach it. Now, Rabbi Yechanan said the opposite. That kol halem Torah umalanda. If you know Torah and you teach it, but you choose to live in a place, you go on shliches, you go to the midbar, you don't stay in the hub, you go out there, that's the greatest chus. Then you are like a hadas in the midbar. In other words, if there's nothing else other than you, so if you're once amongst many, very nice. But the dafka, the whole idea, that's Yaakov went on shlichus somewhere, who knows where, to go away to bring Torah over there. And
is that why the Rebbe added Hadassim?
What was that?
Is that why the Rebbe added Hadassim?
It could be. Very nice. So Gabriel is saying that, look at the Rebbe, went on the max 36 Hadassim, are the 36 head shluchim. whoever they are. That's amazing. Okay. That God will replace the trees again. Now there's a concealment. Now it looks like the world is separated. That came from the Goyishkeit. But when the Goyim act, there are certain things that were taken away from the Jewish people that can never be replaced, and therefore they will never be forgiven for that. What they destroyed is irreplaceable, right? The 3 lines from the bottom. As it says that that in the place of copper I'm going to bring gold. The Jewish people are kodesh. And when a person takes something away from Hegdish, what's the rule we learned? You have to add a chaimish. So whoever's going to have to replace that which they took, they're going to have to add. So who you took copper, you got to bring gold. Tachas abarzel, you have to replace it with kesef to be atoned. Tachas o eitzim, you got to bring the choishes. Tachas o avonim, you got to bring barzel. So now the question is, now that's the rhetorical question. Tachas Rabbi Akiva v'chaveiro, that they murdered. What are they going to give back? What can top Rabbi Akiva? Nothing exists that's greater than Rabbi Akiva. And therefore, for everything that the Goyim took away from the Jewish people throughout Golas, that v'nikesi damam, but bloy nikesi. God is saying, I would love to cleanse the nations. Hashem is going to want to cleanse the world. But for the sins of the blood that they took from the Jewish people, for that will be no cleansing. Okay, weiter. The Mishnah went into details. The Mishnah spoke about 5 mountaintops. Now, guys, 5 mountaintops. The space in between them is 4. First one being Hara Mishcha, which we call Hara Zeisim, and the last one was called Beis Baltin. Beis Baltin was the final place in the Holy Land where they had these torches that they were waving. So first of all, my Beis Baltin, my doesn't mean what. My means where. That's very common, that my has such similar meanings. So answers the Gemara, Amar Rav, guys, Daf Chav Gimel Amud Beis. That refers to Biram. Okay, so now we know, if you know Biram, you know exactly where it is. Then the Mishnah says that they would not stop waving the torch from top of Beis Baltin until the whole Goyla was illuminated like a bonfire. So what does the whole Goyla mean? What, they waited until the whole bubble, the whole diaspora? No, Goyla refers to one specific city in Golos, which was a hub, which was a center city, Amar Rav Yosef, the Crown Heights of over there, of Babel. And that was called then Pompedisa. And what does it mean that Maike Maduras Eish, they wanted the whole Pompedisa to be lit up with a bonfire? What does that mean? It means exactly that. It means, Chavre, that in this Pompedisa, it wasn't enough for there to be one location where the people signaling that they saw, they also lit a fire and they waved it the way you wave a lulav. No, that every person in Pompedisa would light a torch. Tanach kol echad ve'echad noitel ba'avuka b'yadai. And 1 second, there's how many mountains? And everyone would go to their roof, and everyone would shackle the torch to when Meshakal Dalulav, they made Nanuyim. So the Yid that was standing in Beis Baltin, to him, from that vantage point, it looked like the whole Pompedisa was on fire. Tanya, Rab Shimon, ben Elazar Oymen. I want you to know that even though the Mishnah mentioned 5 tops, it's more than that. There was a place called Chorim. It's the name of a mountain, the name of a region. There was a mountain there. And Choyor, Vigeder, and V'chavroisea, torches were also lit over there. Now, where are these additional locations? So there's a machlekes. Ikada Amri, Beini, Ubeini, Havakaima, that they are points, the points that Rab Shimon added were in between the ones mentioned in the Mishnah. You understand? So the Mishnah speaks about the main mountaintops, but on the way, during that, and that same direct kivun, there were really other mountaintops upon which also torches were lit. Oh, but Ikada Amri, no. Lahach Gisa the Eretz Yisrael Havakaima. It was on another side of Eretz Yisrael, another side. Don't think about east-west, guys, because west of Eretz Yisrael, you know what's west of Eretz Yisrael? The Yam HaGadol. It means that when you would travel from Eretz Yisrael to Babel, there were different ways of traveling. You would go more this way, more that way. And the Mishnah only gave you one line of mountains that's going in one of the paths. And Rab Shimon gave another. Mar Choshev, the High Gisa, Mar Choshev, the High Gisa, each one, right, spoke about a different section of Eretz Yisrael that's stretching towards Babel, towards Babel. Very good. Says the Gemara, how much space do you have in between every mountaintop that the Mishnah mentioned? You have 8 parsa. Just for the context, 1 parsa is anywhere between 2.3 and 3 miles. So in between each mountaintop, you have 8 parsois. Now again, the Mishnah gave 5 mountaintops. How many spaces, gaps do you have in between 5? 4. If we're saying that each one was 8, so how much is 4 times 8, my friends? 32. So asks the Gemara, Kama Avalahu, you're telling me that there was only 32. If you were to travel on a road going from Haramishcha, going from Harazeisim, going from the outskirts of Yerushalayim, if you would travel on a road with your speedometer or with whatever is measuring the kilometers, the miles, you would end up in Pumbedisa. It's a lot more than 32. Answers the Gemara, yeah, because the direct roads are non-existent anymore. You have to go on the roads that are on the earth. They go here and they go there. So it adds a lot of miles. It adds a lot of kilometers. Amar Abaye, the direct road used to be, but istat tume istatum luhu darche, that the roads became obscured. And this is obviously there's a lot of ruchniistic meanings that even when you're traveling somewhere, you have to go a little bit to the right. It's very hard to stay in the center. You got to taka. You don't go straight from the top to Tiferes. You don't go straight from Tiferes down into Yusoid. You have to go the Yud Beis Gevulei Alachs, and you have to go a little bit here, a little bit there. And for the people down on earth to get from here to there, they have to travel more. The chsiv, as it says, and that's a punishment because we don't have the ability to stay as in the golden middle. God says in Golus, I will hedge your way with thorns. The direct path you can't go. Or Rav Nachman by Yitzchak brings another pasuk, the chsiv, Nisi Vaisai, Ivam, right? That my paths now are twisted. But if you look at it from the vantage points, if you can fly, no, then if you go from the top of Haramishcha to Baltan, to base Baltan, it's taka 32 parsois. Okay, Atkan, how things used to be. And now both Mishnahs we're going to have today are going to speak about, firstly, what happened to the Edom when they came to Yerushalayim, ubehemshech, to what we learned already, even going back to the first Perek, that even if they needed to travel on Shabbos and beyond the Tchum, they would travel. But we learned in Masechtas Shabbos and Masechtas Eruvin that if someone travels beyond the Tchum, now what? Now when I came to my destination, whether I was allowed to, whether I was not allowed to, now I'm stuck in my Daladamas. Now, until the end of Shabbos or Yom Tov, I can't go beyond Daladamas. But if I am in a physically enclosed area, which is like a chutzner that has mamash, a fence around it, then the chutzner area is like my Daladamas. In other words, when they came to Yerushalayim, they didn't go to the Sanhedrin. They needed to be interrogated by members of the Sanhedrin. They didn't go into the Sanhedrin because wherever they reached, they would have to be there until the end of Shabbos. So first of all, they would prepare near the Makam HaMikdash a beautiful big courtyard for everyone to be comfortable to spend the rest of the day there. And the question will be, if you can walk around in a courtyard, you can walk beyond 4 cubits. Because it's an enclosed courtyard, so why can't they just stay in Yerushalayim and HaKodesh? The whole Yerushalayim is surrounded with a wall. And the answer is that the Mishnah is referring to that which happened towards the end of Bayis Sheni. And from the times of the Yevanim, there were certain breaches in the walls around Yerushalayim, which no longer, says Tosfos, the third Tosfos, afforded Yerushalayim like a din of a chatzar. Okay, let's go. So chatzir gedoylo Yerushalayim. So they built a chatzir that was physically completely surrounded with a fence, and it was very large. Ubeis ya'azek hoyson nikras or hoyson nikres, and it was called beis ya'azek. Ulasham kolo edem miskansem, and they would all gather in that chatzir, and with the advantage that whenever you come to your destination, you're stuck in Daladamas. So you wanted people not to feel to the certain degree that they're stuck. So it was very large and everyone got there. Now, we also said that even when the moon last night was very clearly visible, we paskin that everyone should come and say testimony. So many people would come. Indeed. So based in Haggadol would go there. And we're going with the premise that they no longer can walk around freely in Yerushalayim. So everyone gathered there. And before we ask which group did they interrogate first, before that, first of all, you should know they would put there a lot of food. Why? So they should come the next time around. Imagine if you would go there's a limit how much Mesiras Nefesh many people will have. You're going to get over there and it's not comfortable and there's no location and there's no food. They made it very comfortable, including big meals. And indeed, Rosh Hashana originally, even after they testified, like the halacha is that once you pass beyond the tchum, you're bound to your daladamis. But an enclosed area is like daladamis, so they would stay there until Motzei Shabbos. However, even though you had su'udas gedolos, and even though they had lounge chairs, mit alle gute Sachen, it demanded a certain amount of sacrifice. And you know what happened? Hiskin Rabban Gamliel Hazaken, that no, he made a takana, this is way later, that since you came because you were doing a mitzvah, now that you fulfilled your mission in Yerushalayim, you are like any other Yerushalmi, which would mean you began Shabbos in Yerushalayim, that I can walk michutz le'ir to every direction, 2,000 amma.
In the year for sure.
In the ear for sure, and even michutz le'ir and michutz of the ibur ha'ir with the 70 amos and a little bit all the halachas we'll learn to Masechta Seiruvin. Shiyu mahalchan alpaim amal l'chol ruach, and that makes a lot of sense. Again, this is a concept of hitiru soifan b'shum tchilas. They needed to make it easy for people. People were not willing to inconvenience themselves even a bit. And v'loy elu bilvad, it wasn't this heter of Rabban Gamliel the elder, wasn't only for the people that came to testify about the sightings of the new moon, but ela af chachama, which is a midwife, or today it would be a gynecologist that traveled beyond the tchum haba'a liyaleid. They're allowed to travel because the woman is in danger. But what happens after they went beyond the tchum and the woman gave birth? Rab Gamliel Hazaken says they are as if they began Shabbos in that location, which freed them up. Or the Habala Hatzal Menadleika, a firefighter. You rightfully went beyond the tchum because there's a fire burning over there.
Is the soul for that?
Hatzala to come back, yeah. I mean, Hagayas, if there was an army, and you're part of the Shmira, you're part of the defense of the IDF, and you went over there. Now what? Umin Hanor, you heard someone is drowning or a whole ship sunk. We need to have a lot of people who are jumping in and saving them. You're a lifeguard. Umin Hamapoilis, if God forbid a building collapsed. No, it's whenever your trip was l'tzoyrech mitzvah, after you did the mitzvah, whether you were matzliach, whether, God forbid, you were unable to help, but you went there b'kedin, then harei elu ka'anshe ho'ir, then you are like any of the locals, meaning v'yesh lahem alpayim l'chol ruach, and Shlema add the words outside of the city, like every other yid. Now, there's a semantic question again. It's interesting how many Mishnayos were focusing on what the meaning of the word is. That original chatzar was called Beis Ya'azek. That's the way we have it in our Mishnah. Yud Ayin Zayin Kuf. Elohu Beis Ya'azek Tanan, which will have a positive connotation, as we'll see, or maybe Beis Yazek. Yazek has a certain restrictive, they call it like jail. Like, what are we focusing on? Beis Yazek Tanan, because we dafka gave it a lishna ma'aliyah, we gave it some sort of positive expression. And what do we find in scripture? We find that word tichsiv, vayezkeyu, vayisalkeyu. This is regarding ringing or fencing an area in, and then clearing it from stones. It's a lashon that you use when you are creating a positive environment. Oidilma Beis Yazek Tanan, and Yazek without the ayin. We're now with the comments, Amad the Yud, that will imply Lishna the Tzaruhu, it's some sort of discomfort. Where do we find the word Yazek, Yud Zayin Kuf? It connotes discomfort, as it says, who asur, he was trapped, he was in prison, or he was bound, bo azikin, with chains. Verstehst? Because before Rabbi Gamliel Hazaken, they were trapped in there. And Amar Abaya, no, it must have been Yazek, because you see, Tashema, look in our Mishnah, Su'udes Gedoyle Soya Oisim Omsham. No, they made big meals. No one felt trapped. So the Gemara says that's not a proof. It's not a stira. That's life. Dilma they made it as comfortable as you could. They made su'udas gedoylos. They gave perks, but still you were bound to be in that chatzar gedoyla with many other people. So they called it yazek. Quarantine. Very good. In a hotel. Quarantine hotel. In the beginning, we called it Beis Yazek. It's when the people were fine in being there. And Rabbi Gamliel Hazaken made this leniency because he saw people can't take it. Maybe later, we began to call it, you're going to jail? You're going over there, Beis Yazek? So he stopped it. Okay. Now we're going to go and learn some pratim again regarding astronomy. So we established everyone gathered in that Chatzar Gedol. And even though later they were free to move around, not originally. If you're not free to move around, even though normally you come to testify in front of court, if you're not free to move around, then the court would send people, as we learned in the previous Mishnah, to go into the Chatzar. And now we have to do a couple of things. First, we have to determine who are we going to interrogate and what will be at least the basic questions that will be asked to them. So the first emphasis of the Mishnah will be who did they examine first, not the most scholarly, not the elderly that need to rest, but it was on a first-come basis. That Zug, Shabbat Rishoin, the first group that got there, Boitkin Oisarishan. Like by the Rebbe's Lulav. Who got the Lulav? Whoever got the ticket first. Whoever got there first. Another detail that the Mishnah doesn't even have to write over here, Bachlal, whenever Beis Din would interrogate witnesses, they would never interrogate them together. That's the whole point of having two, or from the points of having two. They would separate them. Verstehst? Each one would be interrogated separately, and then we would see if their testimony will align. Now, from the Zug, which one of the two would they interrogate first? Here we would give cover to the older one. No, it's the group did not go on age, it went on who came first. But from the group, the one, they gave cover here, the one that was Gadol. And now the next part of the Mishnah will be, what were the basic questions that he was asked? So they would ask him, Emoir, Zod, say, how did you see the moon? Let me explain like this. Even though what I'm saying now, some of it, the Gemara is going to change. But the Havamina is, as we said already before, that during the new month, which is when you see the moon will always be to the east of the sun. And b'diyuk, first there was sunset. It's called la'achar hachama, not lifnei hachama. First there's sunset, and prior to moonset, the moon is up in the horizon at least a little bit. That is when you're going to see the little sliver of the moon. Another very important detail, that from our perspective, it's not that the sunrise and the moonrise is mamish east, smack in middle. And then sunset is smack in middle of west. We know it's not that way here. When Chabad Solo, when we daven, right, during the summer, the sun never gets in anyone's eyes. Because the sun, both by sunrise and by sunset, during summer, the sun is going to be coming up more to the north. And during winter, it's always from the east, but it's more in the north. And during winter, it's more from the south, right? When you're driving down Pico Boulevard, the sun won't always be in your eyes in the morning. Certain times of the year, it's coming from an angle. No matter summer or winter, no matter, another thing, it doesn't make a perfect arch to go down. It always, when it goes up from east, going down to west, it goes derech darim, it goes towards the south. That's the south. It only is going, so to say, towards the south, going west, but like southward until noon. And then from noon until sunset, it goes, again, it's going from east to west. But you can also say it's going from south to north. It's going from south to north. It's going back down to the north, which makes sense why summer the days are longer. Because if the sun is coming up towards the north, it has to travel longer. It needs more time for it to be up. And it's going up towards the south. Then it's going back down all the way a lot on the north. So it traverses in the heavens a lot longer, which is talking about why the days are long. Winter, it goes up from the south. It's going derech darim, so it doesn't have to travel that much. So it's quicker. It makes this 180 much quicker. The sunrise and sunset are closer with each other. The days are short. The moon more or less follows the sun. Not exactly. We're going to learn that already tomorrow. That's very important. Many people get confused, but it's very pashut. I want you to know like this. Let's speak about sunset. Let's speak about the new moon. When you look at the horizon, here where God blessed us to live until Mashiach here in Los Angeles, and you're looking at the beautiful sunset, when you're looking, if you're only, is the moon to the north or the south of the sun, which will be the topic of tomorrow, not to confuse it here, that depends on what time of the year. It's interestingly that in summer, the moon is going to be towards the north of the sun. That means if you're looking at sunset, you're looking at the beach here, because here the Pacific is in the west. You're looking at the west. If you see the sun coming down, the moon in the summer is going to come down even more north. The moon in the winter is going to be more towards the south. That's not b'chlal what the Mishnah is speaking about over here, north and south. What we are speaking about is one question. The moon is trailing the sun. The moon is not leading the sun. Or like we said before, the moon is towards the east of the sun, which is why sunset will be first, and then there'll be moonset. Just like b'chlal, the sun, when it goes up, it's coming up in the east, no matter where in the east, but it's going a little bit towards the south. It's not going direct towards the west to set. It's going like derech doron, and then it goes derech, then it goes towards the north. The moon is also going down toward the north. Okay, so these two questions are really the same question, according to the Havamina. They asked him, is it lifnei achama? Lifnei achama means, was the moon towards the west of the sun? Was there moon set before sunset, or la'achar achama? And it's always la'achar achama. If it would not be la'achar achama, they wouldn't even see it. It's behind. And another detail, when it was going down in an angle, did you notice the angle that it was setting? Was it going from south to north, which it always goes from south to north, Sion summer and Sion winter, always. Both the sun and the moon, we're speaking about the moon. Or lidroima, was it up moving? Yeah, when it was setting in the west, was it going towards the south? These two are very much connected one to the other. That the Gemara is going to ask, it's more or less the same question, and therefore we're going to give a different understanding of one of these two questions. And now the third question is, how high was it when you saw it? So if you saw it right before the moon set, then they would say it was right on top of the horizon. But you can see it even in the new month. Even in the new month, it's a little bit high. It's not very high up, because when it's very high up, the sun didn't set yet. You wouldn't see it. But they would ask, how high was it? The Gemara is going to clarify. We'll learn that tomorrow. Like, what would they say? A foot, a meter? Like, there was a certain standard measurement that people were familiar with, and they would use that as, was it 2? Was it 3 of that? So that was the third question. And now question number 4. This means the horns. Was it pointing towards the north or pointing towards the south? Pointing towards the north, pointing towards the south. How wide was the crescent? Again, it's the beginning of the month. The crescent is very little, but still they used certain items that people were familiar with as a reference. We'll see, it was barley coins. Was it 1 thick? Was it 2 thick? Now, regarding the above questions, im amar lifnei achama, if the eight said, the moon was west of the sun, which is what we're saying, that's lifnei, lo yamar klum. And similarly, if he would say the moon was going, it was going down in the west, but it was going from north to south. No. An 8 could say, I didn't notice that. That would be fine. But if he gave the wrong answer, then he's out. Anyway, they asked many detailed questions. And after the one person answered, they would bring in the second witness, and they asked the same questions. So if their words align, then they do some kayemis. And again, we'll learn, God willing, tomorrow that not everything needed to perfectly align, because especially when it comes to high up in the horizon, how thick, there's a certain acceptance, there's a certain discrepancy that means nothing. There's a certain discrepancy, no, nishtames. Now, once they got one group that properly aligned their answers, now they already have an accepted zug of Eidim. What did we also learn in the last Mishnah? Normally, what would the Beis Din do in a normal case? They would tell all the witnesses, thanks for coming, right? The jury, you're dismissed. Halavai. But they never did that. They didn't want anyone to feel disappointed that their trip was in vain. They would interrogate everyone that was there, but it was much lesser questions because it was really not necessary. They asked simpler questions. The Shar Kol HaZugos, they only asked them, Rashi Devarim, the main points, and not only, in other words, much less detailed. And they didn't even need it anymore. Once the Sanhedrin knew that they got one good zug, they were not needed. They should not go away disappointed. So it was a little bit of a feeder, but it was necessary. Why was it necessary? So asks the Gemara whether you're asking if the moon was west of the sun or east of the sun. which is the first question of Lifnei Achama. Whether you want to know if the moon is going down, was it moving to the north? That's the same question. Because I want to say it like this. If the new moon, you know when the new moon is going to the south? You know when the new moon is going to the south? By sunrise. By sunrise, both the sun and the moon, it goes up, angled, it goes from east to west, angled towards the south. But in the beginning of the month, if the moon is east of the sun, which it is, which means, if the moon is east of the sun by the rising of the sun and the moon, which one will come up first? If the moon is to the east of the sun, it's going to come up after the sun. It's behind the sun. Once the sun is up in the horizon, in the beginning of the month when the moon is just a sliver, you can't see it anymore. So once the aide gave the correct answer, no, the moon is to the east of the sun, not to the west, it's like asking him, was it going towards the north? Because if he says it was going towards the south, that can only be in sunrise. Sunrise, once we already established that the new moon is towards the east, you would never see it. The moon would be up in the sky. The sun would be up in the sky first. Again, the moon will come up after the sun. The moon is following the sun in the beginning of the month. That means it rises after the sun. It sets after the sun. So these two questions are the same. So Amar Abaye, he clarifies that the first question of Lifnei Achama or La'achar Achama doesn't mean east or west. No, that's L'tzfeina l'Roimam. Did you see it in sunrise or sunset, basically? L'tzfeina means you saw it during sunset, which is the only time you see it because it's towards the east. Lifnei Achama means the moon, even when it's a sliver, right? One side is rounded. The deficient side or the indented side is called the Pigma. Tezvav, you see a circle. All other parts of the months, one side will be the circle. The other side is what we call the indentation, the Pigma. So if from our perspective, when you see the sun and you see the moon, is the Pigma facing the sun? Or is the fullness of the moon facing the sun? And what do we know the answer is? Of course, the fullness of the moon is facing the sun. The Pigma is never facing the sun. Kevin would have been here, there would have been 90 pictures up. That is what they asked him. Pigimasa lifnei achama? Is the indentation facing the sun, which never happens? The indentation is mamish, the opposite side of the sun. And im amar lifnei achama, then oloy amar klum. And some more agadata. That the miniyam and dread is with God. And because of the exaltedness and the acknowledgement of the exaltedness of God, that is what makes peace b'miraimov in the heights. So what's the peace does that refer to? What's the potential, not peace, which God makes peace to? Says second to last line, the sun never saw the indentation of the moon. You understand something that if the sun would have seen the indentation of the moon, there's not enough time to speak out the whole Midrash that we are familiar with, that really when God made the sun and the moon, they were the same. Then the Torah speaks about the Gadol and the Katan, because the Levana told the Eivishter that it's not proper for two crowns to the same king. So God says, you're right. Go make yourself smaller. Then the Levana pushed back. Why am I? Because I brought up a good point. I'm getting punished. And ultimately the Nechama that God gave to the moon is that the Jewish people will count to the moon. And we are compared to the moon. But we don't want, for the Levana, it's like when a person has a blemish, they don't want the other to see their blemish. So if the sun, so to say, were to face the indentation of the moon would have been very not comfortable. That would have brought about a machloikas. God makes peace by making sure that the Gashmi is that the laws of the laws of whatever laws God created, that this should work. For us, it's obvious, but God made up those rules. Is that the indentation is never visible to the side of the moon, and similarly, the last line, the second, think about it. Whenever there's a rainbow, the rainbow also is a crescent. The crescent, the pigima, the indentation is never facing the sun. Never. It's always the other way around. The circular side, the wholesome side, is that which is facing the sun. And here we are. That's Rabbi Yechanan, because the moon will be disheartened. If the moon is disheartened, it's going to bring about to a machloikas between the moon and the sun, and that's the meaning of Oisa Shalom Eminem, one of the meanings. Pigimasa Shol Keshes, why did God make the world in a way that whenever there is a rainbow, that the indented part of the rainbow or the string part of the rainbow is never facing the sun, those sun worshippers should never say, look at that. It almost looks like that the keshes, the rainbow is a bow, and they attributed wrongfully so some divinity in the sun. The sun is a tool, God is the master. But they sadly, they cut off those trees. They made a duality. They separated one from the other. Independent, they viewed it. And it almost looked like that Hashem is using the rainbow to shoot arrows to us. Oh, so now you got to worship the sun. For us never to have, it's punkt fakert. That we are the ones that are pointing an arrow towards the sun and towards the sun worshippers by ingraining in us the concept of Hashem Echad and of Achdus Hashem. And about the Iyu v'chayoy echad and Iyu v'garmoy echad, which all has to do with all of the 10 spheres being properly connected to the ground, and a lot more to be continued. Hello, guys, wake up. This is good.